For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted. This week, we're digging into a plant I've been teasing from the very beginning. One scorned ladies have loved, and their husbands have loathed, Belladonna. Belladonna is a plant that has almost as many names as it does stories. It's also known as Deadly Nightshade, the Devil's Cherry, Duane, Deathberries, and one of my personal favorites, Beautiful Death. While it may go by many names, there's no mistaking this absolutely iconic botanical. Belladonna, or really Atropa belladonna, is a member of the Solanaceae or nightshade family, with famous cousins like potato, tomato, eggplant, and of course, henbane. It's native to parts of Europe and Western Asia, specifically Turkey. It's also been naturalized in North America and, honestly, pretty much all over the world. This stuff spreads like wildfire, especially in areas that get lots of rain, have plenty of limestone, and have disturbed soil so their tiny little seeds can really get in there without too much work. Belladonna is best known for its shiny black fruits and stunning foliage that springs forth out of its pale gray stems. It can get up to 7 feet tall and is technically categorized as a subshrub since it's on the smaller side and it's much springier. They have very distinct bell-shaped flowers that are a pale purple that fade into a yellowish green at the base. The blooms are said to smell faintly floral, while the berries are supposed to smell a bit like unripened tomatoes, so like a very fresh, kind of summery scent. The berries, and really the whole plant, are toxic. And much like henbane, it's also been used in many medications, ceremonies, and cosmetics. Even killings. While they're super toxic, they're also a little bit sweet, making them a little extra deadly, as that telltale bitterness isn't there as a warning. But before it was regarded as a way to permanently let go of a lover, it was used across history as a way to worship, let loose, and look your best. In terms of worship, Belladonna was often given as an offering to Hecate and pretty much all of the other badass ladies in Greek, Turkish, and even Nordic cultures. In Greece, Belladonna was given as an offering to the gods due to its connection to beauty, power, and hallucinations. Aside from that, it was also said to be the physical manifestation of Atropa, the final sister of the three fates, who was responsible for death / the ending of things. In Turkey, Belladonna played an important role in the transition from girl to woman. According to an old wives' tale, girls would dig up belladonna root the night before their 13th birthday, then carry it over their heads on the way home, as members of their village would try to get in their way, start an argument, or otherwise block her path. If the girl managed to get home without engaging with anyone, she would be rewarded with a lifetime of beauty. If not, she would be cursed and forced to be ugly forever. Which is, pretty high stakes for a birthday party, if you ask me, but, I guess it's kind of fun? I don't know. In Norse culture, Belladonna was very closely related to valkyries. As a quick crash course for those not so familiar, valkyries are winged women warrior spirits who pluck the souls of those who die on the battlefield and guide them to their afterlife. Nightshade is tied to these ladies because of the rumored historical practice that involved soldiers in Germany and other parts of the world, but we're focused on areas with valkyries right now, eating belladonna berries before battle to fall into a sort of vicious trance that made them able to fight harder, faster, and for longer than their opponents. Of course, those who fought hardest would have caught the eye of a valkyrie, who would have then taken them to live with Odin as they prepared for Ragnarok. Speaking of the afterlife, Deadly Nightshade is also closely tied to the devil himself, with some reports claiming that he loved it so much that anytime he was unable to be near it, he would send a guard to look after his beloved blooms. Obviously, or maybe not so obviously, a lot of this is tied back to the tangled web of Belladonna being used in magic and in murder. As such a prolific poison and potion ingredient, it really should come as no surprise that so many were quick to cry Satan. Before we dive into the real murder and medicine of it all, we have a few fictional murders I wanted to quickly touch on, as they really serve to capture the reputation Belladonna has made for itself back then, and even into today. For starters, Deadly Nightshade pops up in famed favorite and later Disney classic Snow White, as the famed substance that poisoned the apple the evil stepmother gives to Snow White. Because the berries are famously sweet, at least in comparison to most other deadly plants, they would have been easily hidden by the taste of the apple, and because it's so potent and easier to find in the kind of shady forest she ran to, it would have been pretty easy for the evil witch to pull off. Outside of fairy tales, Deadly Nightshade also popped up in plenty of Shakespeare's works, most notably as the poison Juliet would have been given in Romeo and Juliet. This is due to the fact that Belladonna infamously can cause the users to enter a deep, trance-like state before death because of the way it impacts the heart. But we'll get to all of that in a second. As a complete aside, Shakespeare is regarded as a bit of an herbalist, or he was at least as interested as I am in all of it, and he seemed to be equally as into the Nightshade family as I am, so it's not a shock that he tends to pop up in a lot of these episodes. And it's nice to know that psychedelic poisons really are the tie that binds us across time and space. As a hard pivot back from all of that murder, let's dive into the real-life applications of Belladonna. Kicking it off, we'll start with cosmetics. Belladonna was used in a variety of cosmetics across history, like blush, perfume, and even eye drops. As a blush, Belladonna leaves and berries were crushed, then a tonic of sorts would be brushed onto the skin, resulting in a flushed look. This is partially because Belladonna can be slightly irritating to the skin, and because as it's absorbed into the skin, it increases heart rate and blood flow, leading to a literal blushing effect. This subtle color has actually inspired modern cosmetic companies, so if you want to replicate the look, you can do so without poisoning yourself. Isn't progress fun? Eye drops were made in a similar manner, but with just the juice of the berry, which was very diluted, with some sources saying just 1 part juice to up to 130 parts water could still dilate the pupils. And Renaissance ladies would drip this into their eyes for a seductive, dilated look, because nothing says party quite like giant pupils. This again works due to the active chemicals Belladonna contains, which can easily pass through the blood-brain barrier and very easily absorb into the body. We can thank the tropane alkaloids, scopolamine, atropine, and hyoscyamine for that dilation, as these guys act as anticholinergics which target the central nervous system. By suppressing the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, these chemicals prevent communications from the brain and the rest of the body, leaving certain muscles to kind of fend for themselves. This results in vomiting, increased heart rate, and eventually hallucinations, seizures, and cardiac arrest in higher doses. Of course, Belladonna wasn't just used in cosmetics, but also in medicine and recreation. In recreational history, Belladonna was sometimes employed for trips due to its hallucinogenic properties. But these trips aren't like the ones often depicted in Hollywood or described by those using mushrooms or LSD. Instead, they're often described as being confusing, with users feeling disjointed, disconnected, and disoriented. There tend to be strong, sometimes euphoric feelings, and often people report feelings of flying. In medieval medicine, Belladonna was often used in something commonly referred to as twilight sleep, a combination of belladonna and opium often used as a sedative when people were entering surgery, and sometimes even in childbirth, as it would help to relax the muscles and reduce pain, though today we have much safer options. It was also commonly employed for most of the same uses of henbane, like as a painkiller, muscle relaxer, anti-inflammatory, or to treat menstrual problems, peptic ulcer diseases, motion sickness, and a bunch of other ailments. It was also sometimes used as a tincture and added to band-aids, sort of like the transdermal patches that are still used in motion sickness treatment today. We talk a lot about all of that in the recently remastered episode on henbane, so I won't be digging too much deeper into the medical uses here, but you can check out that episode and our coverage of Datura if you want to learn more about how members of the nightshade family have traditionally been used to treat various ailments. Since we're not rehashing all of that science, I thought it might be interesting to dive into some of the real-life murder cases that leveraged Belladonna. This isn't a true crime podcast, so we won't be getting into all of the grisly details, but because this is such an iconic chapter in the story of this plant, I just didn't want to leave it out entirely. Now, there are so many cases that have leveraged Belladonna, and we're not going to get into all of them. They really have spanned the gamut from, ancient Greeks poisoning the food of their enemies to win battles, all the way to just people who are really upset about someone and just straight up murdering them. But today we're going to really focus on my personal favorite, which has to be the case of Aqua Tofana. To really understand what led to this case, and to kind of enter it with a bit of empathy, we have to head back to 16th century Italy. It was candidly not a great time for women, who were very much regarded as objects and had to rely on men to even be treated decently. Women were often pressured at a fairly young age to settle down and marry a man, even if he was cruel, unhelpful, or even just straight up gross. Women didn't really have a say, especially if they were not from wealthy families, and were essentially forced into these marriages with very little regard for their own feelings or even safety. Unfortunately, life after marriage wasn't much better. For most forced into these marriages, their days were spent taking care of a man who looked down on them, didn't value their contributions, and was often abusive when he didn't get his way. For many, their futures seemed bleak at best. Without a marriage, women weren't permitted to own land, their own homes, work jobs, or have any source of real financial freedom. So without getting married, they really didn't have many options. However, one woman, Giulia Tofana, knew there was a way out. At the age of 13, her own mother was executed after being accused of murdering her abusive husband by poisoning his food. As she got older, Giulia remembered this lesson from her mother and decided she should try her hand at this practice, this time being a bit more careful in the craft. So, she set to work creating a poison that was reliable, easily concealable, and most importantly, virtually untraceable. After a few iterations, she settled on what is now infamously referred to as Aqua Tofana, a blend of nightshade, arsenic, and lead. Going into this, Giulia knew she couldn't just straight up sell poison to women on the street. She would never be able to stay in one town long enough to earn the trust of her customers. Plus, let's face it, she couldn't exactly market her husband-killing concoction. Hello, ladies, Giulia Tofana here. Looking for a way to get rid of that disgusting slob you sit across from at the dinner table each night? Boy, howdy, do I have just the thing for you. Just a few drops of my miracle elixir, and your troubles will be a thing of the past. Don't believe me? Just listen to these satisfied customers. Not exactly something the cops are just gonna, look the other way on. Instead, she got a group of girlfriends together to sell cosmetics, kind of like a covert Mary Kay operation, but instead of makeup, they were secretly selling murder. The setup was simple enough, though. These ladies would have entire cases of makeup, just like any other apothecary, but this one had a very special product. Manna of St. Nicholas of Bar, a common powder used to treat acne and other blemishes. It looked like any other set of eye drops or ointment a lady of the time might keep in her collection for a night on the town. And because it's just a silly little makeup moment, their husbands would never even notice, let alone ask questions. Once the ladies bought the product, they were instructed to put a first, smaller dose into their husband's food, and continue these doses for a while, spreading them out over time. He wouldn't be able to taste or smell it, since it was just a clear liquid, and it would blend seamlessly into any soup, drink, or any other dish. After the first dose, their spouse would get very sick. This was important, as typically these men were in good health, so if they just dropped dead, it would be pretty suspicious. And considering she would have cooked the food, the customer would have been suspect number one. Not exactly the outcome they were looking for here. So, instead of killing him straight out, these women would instead get their husbands sick and keep them that way, playing the role of devastated, confused, and scared wife, trying to stay strong for the love of their lives. They would even call the doctor after this first dose, who would see the symptoms: sweating, vomiting, increased heart rate, flushed skin, and dilated pupils, and diagnose them with a kind of illness sort of like the modern day cold. So like something that's not a big deal, they'll probably get better in a few days, call me if it gets worse, yada yada, we've all heard it. Then, after about 4 to 5 doses, the man would suddenly pass. Sometimes he was sick for the whole time, other times there may have been a moment where it looked like he was going to get better. But no matter what the story, some things never changed. The men always died, the women always mourned for exactly the acceptable amount of time, and often didn't remarry despite having the best skin in town. And this went on for years, with Julia and her team selling enough poison to kill an estimated 600 men across Italy. But of course, like any other crime syndicate, the past does eventually catch up to you. It's not entirely known exactly what happened, but the most widely accepted answer I saw is that a woman got cold feet when trying to kill her husband. He sucked, but he didn't deserve to die. She decided this as he was like mid-soup slurp, and she begged her husband to stop eating. Frantic, she explained that she had poisoned his soup. Enraged, her husband forced her to tell everything she knew to the police, who later found Julia and her other clients. While that may have been the end for Julia, Aqua Tofana lived on in infamy, with plenty of other women and men being inspired by her poisonous past. In fact, there is another fascinating case from Hungary in the 1920s where the so-called angel makers, a group of frustrated women, boiled flypaper to get the arsenic out to kill their husbands. This ended up going much further and took a lot of very, very dark turns, which ended in these ladies killing what equated to be about 1/8 of the population in their small town. While murder is never something to celebrate, for women who had no other options, Aqua Tofana gave them what they saw was their only way out. Their only chance to live any kind of life not tethered to a man, and to be their whole selves in a society that was otherwise unkind and uncaring to them. Today, Belladonna still pops up in stories, products, magic, and gardens. The active chemicals are still used in motion sickness drugs and some other homeopathic remedies for teething and other mild pain. In fact, in 2016, there was a warning issued not to give it to children in teething medicine due to the impacts on children's bodies and the known issues with belladonna not being consistent in potency. Of course, with how common belladonna is as a weed, and how enticing those berries can look and even taste, it's not too uncommon to hear of people eating them. Luckily though, with early intervention, death by belladonna is not nearly as common, as most people do end up expelling what they ate before it causes serious issues. While I certainly don't suggest you ingest belladonna, the next time you see it in a garden, stumble upon it in the wild, or spot it in your favorite media, I hope you take a moment to say hello and think of all the interesting ways it shaped history and stories across cultures. That's all I've got for this week, but I'll be back next week with some more tall tales and true histories to dig into. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me, M. Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Fren of Fren Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.